Today we're going to learn about photosynthesis, how it works, and why it's important. All life on Earth depends on photosynthesis, okay? Because basically when you come down to it, we've got plants that are taking the sun's energy and they're turning it into chemical energy, okay? And every single organism gets their energy either directly or indirectly from the process of photosynthesis. So let's start with autotrophs. These are the things that are probably actually doing photosynthesis, right? They're able to capture energy from their environment. They are able to feed themselves. They don't need to eat anything else in order to have their own energy, okay? So the big ones here would be things like plants doing photosynthesis, taking sun's light, making their own energy. Here's some algae in the water doing photosynthesis. Here's some cyanobacteria. These are those prokaryotes we talked about that were the first photosynthesizing things that helped build up that free oxygen in the atmosphere in Earth's timeline. And here are some euglena. And these little critters are, they're single-celled eukaryotes. Okay, so really, really primitive. They're not algae. They're slightly different, okay? But as you can see, these greens are chloroplasts. They do photosynthesis too, okay? So all these different things are autotrophs. Another example of an autotroph would be things that live down in deep sea vents. But they can't do photosynthesis because there's no sunlight down there. So they do a thing called chemosynthesis. They make energy from some of the chemicals in the water instead of from the sun's light. And then we've got heterotrophs. Those are the things that capture that energy basically from carbon compounds, and they cannot make their own food. So that would include us and, most animals, and things like fungi. So basically, these are the consumers. They're the eaters. So either you eat something that's a plant, or you eat something that ate something else, that ate something else that was a plant, or you're decomposing something in the case of fungi. Okay, so these would be things that cannot. Since heterotrophs can't feed themselves, really basically what they're doing through photosynthesis is taking light energy to produce the chemical energy that the rest of us get from our food. But since plants don't eat in the traditional sense, they're using light to do it instead, which is pretty cool. So thinking back to our organelles, the chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis, and let's kind of take a more in-depth look at that. So I want you to imagine, here we go, we got a leaf, okay? And the leaves have cells, okay? And there are some cells called mesophyll cells, okay? Here's like looking at a leaf from sideways, okay? So here are some mesophyll cells. They're kind of right at the surface here of the plant. Here's what an actual mesophyll cell looks like, okay? And now see these green blobs inside the mesophyll cell? Those are chloroplasts, okay? So we're zooming in, getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and here's a chloroplast. And inside the chloroplast are these little flattened sacs called the thylakoids, okay? And then a whole stack of the thylakoids is called granum or grana. It's like a plural singular thing. And then there's some kind of like goo, almost like cytoplasm, but not, that the thylakoids are hanging out in, and that's called the stroma. Okay. So again, here's just some vocab, talking about some specifics with more plant things, what I just talked about back in the last slide. Here is a zoom in of a chloroplast, actual chloroplast on a slide. So here, these little things right here, these are the thylakoids. Each one of these stripes is an individual thylakoid, and here's a stack called a granum. Okay, so there's a stack of thylakoids. And as it turns out, photosynthesis is taking place right in here. It's taking place in the thylakoids and the stroma surrounding the thylakoids. And again, this whole thing is a chloroplast, right? Which is an organelle inside the plant cell. Okay, so that's how zoomed in we are with this. Photosynthesis happens in two main stages. They're called the light-dependent reactions and the Calvin cycle. Okay, so here's a brief overview. The light-dependent reactions, this is happening in those thylakoids in their membranes because they're surrounded by a membrane. Okay, so it's happening in that membrane space. And basically, we're taking water and we're releasing oxygen from water. And this whole process is going to make ATP. And it's also going to make its cousin, kind of I think about it as a cousin, another energy molecule called NADPH. okay, but it's an energy molecule, okay? And this is when we talk about photosynthesis, this is the photo part because this is the part there where light comes into play. That's why they're the light-dependent reactions. And the second half happens is called the Calvin cycle. This is taking place not in the thylakoid membranes. It's taking place in that little goo in the chloroplast called the stroma. And here's where we take that energy, that ATP and this NADPH that was made here, and we're going to use it to make some sugar. Okay, so this is the synthesis part because we're making sugar here. We're synthesizing some sugar. And basically, you know, everything needs sugar, so you have to make it yourself, autotrophs through photosynthesis or chemosynthesis, or you got to eat it, okay? And then after that, once we've got our sugar, now we're going to use that sugar to break it down into more ATP to do all the different cellular work that we learned about in our ATP lecture, okay? So again, the light reactions are taking the sun's light and making ATP and NADPH. I know, all of the letters. And so here are the light-dependent reactions, again, happening in the thylakoid membrane. So see this phospholipid bilayer? This is the bilayer of the thylakoid, okay? You don't need to worry about this right now. We're going to go through this step by step in class, okay? And we're going to talk about exactly what's all happening here. But I'm just giving you a chance to see it, wrap your eyeballs around it, because you're going to get a handout in class, and this is going to make a lot more sense later. Okay, so again, this is the photo part of photosynthesis, taking sun's light. We're splitting up water here. There's going to be a whole bunch of stuff happening with some hydrogens and some electrons. And here we are making some ATP and NADPH. Great. And then next, we're going to move into the Calvin cycle. So it's going to take that ATP and NADPH, and we're going to make sugar out of carbon dioxide. Pretty darn cool. Here's the Calvin cycle. I know. Don't worry. You're going to need to know the general stuff of this. You're not going to have to memorize all these little bits, okay? So don't stress. Don't start copying all this down. You're going to get a handout in class that talks exactly to the level of what you need to know about this. But basically, we're going to put in some carbon dioxide. There's going to be a series of reactions powered by ATP and NADPH, okay? And what's going to happen is we're going to end up making glucose, aka sugar. Okay, we're going to end up making sugar out of the whole thing. Right. So if we're thinking about this in a state of a chemical reaction, this would be energy from the sun plus carbon dioxide plus water makes glucose and oxygen. So in general, just taking a look at it, here are the light-dependent reactions. We got water, we got sun's light. This is happening in the thylakoid membranes. Okay, and then our ATP and NADPH that were produced are going to help us do the Calvin cycle and the stroma, and this is going to make sugar. It's going to make sucrose down here. Okay, and again, the specifics of the ins and the outs of the stuff, we're going to talk about more in class when we draw it out. Okay, so here are some things you should generally know. Again, this is going to make a lot more sense when we talk about it, but at least now you will have seen it and understood some of the big picture stuff before we get into the nitty-gritty details coming up in class. As always, you should be consulting your book to help you, and we are in Chapter 8, all about photosynthesis.